Welcome to our MOOCs on Introduction to Sociology 2. And today we shall be doing the module on modern conflict theory as well as the elite theory and its schools. Now, learners, as being students of sociology, you must be very familiar with the different schools of functionalism, structural functionalism, etc. Now, whenever we come to conflict theory, we actually have our tryst with the functionalism and then we step into the genre of conflict theory. Conflict theory is a major alternative to functionalism as an approach to analyze the general structures of the society and the theory. Functionalists look at societies and social systems in which all the parts depend on each other and work together to create an equilibrium. Whereas functionalists see interdependence and unity in society, conflict theorists see groups by fighting for power and suppressing its rivals. As I said, when you're talking about functionalism and you want to jut out of it, conflict theory is the best alternative which can be provided. Because when functionalism talks about equilibrium between the different parts of the society, it doesn't talk about the disjunctions, the gaps. It just talks about integration and nothing else. Also, at the same time, whenever functionalists work, they talk about the unity, they talk about the integration and the solidarity, ensuing solidarity, or the maintenance of the structure. But conflict theorists are more interested about those facets of life where people hanker for more power and privilege and they want to furnish their own interests over others by suppressing the rivals, and they go on debating and fighting for the occupation of more power, prestige and all those resources which are largely coveted and which are more in demand because they are less in supply. Functionalists see civil law, for instance, as a way to increase social integration, whereas conflicts look at it as ways of benefiting certain groups of people over others. It's a shift of the balance of power. So when you go to a village, when you talk about with the girls, and if in a school the teacher points at you, all those people who are sitting with the happy faces in the first bench with their copies and books wide open in front of them, we are getting a functional picture. Because the conflict theorists say it might not be and it never can be that not a single child is a dropout in the school and nobody complains that we don't feel very comfortable in the class. People will have problems and there can be multiple problems. There can be religious problems, educational problems, learning behavioral problems. All these problems will be there. So when you are trying to mask those problems, when you are not talking about those problems and you are trying to suppress your grievances and your grumblings and your complaints and you don't talk about your agitations, that is what you are trying to be too functional and not being able to throw up your conflicts and every internal feelings that make society more mucky, more muddy and more complicated. So it is basically a shift in the balance of power. Somebody is there in the power with a social juggernaut in place, the place will be changed and somebody else will be at the helm of the affairs. That happens because of the mechanisms of the society which are dictated and spelled out very clearly by the theory of conflict. Now, what are the three connected assumptions? There are some basic interests not defined by societies but rather common to them all. Now, what are these common interests are? One is the hankering, as I had been telling you for a long time, for power, for prestige, for status, because these things are very less quantified or less in amount in the society. So people are always running after that. Everybody wants, for the power to be there in his hands because power is coercive. Power is something which can be enforced and power is something which makes you more coveted and more sought after in the society. It also makes you more authoritarian and it also makes others your subject. So power is absolutely coercive. Power as the core of any social relationship, it is coercive in nature and the source of conflict, distribution of resources that people have or that make people more or less powerful. Any origin of conflict, will find it in power. embedded in power. So power is the origin of any sort of conflict. So any small conflict which you see among the children, or even the topmost conflicts happening, be the Ukrainian war, be it some sort of revolutions, be it the Adivasi Andolans, be it some environmental movements, the Chipko Andolan, or you talk about the Narmada Bachao Andolan, all the peasant uprisings that had been happening, even in the past days, those of Telangana and Tebhaga, there had been power at the helm of the thing. So some people who feel they have been rejected, they have been badly suppressed, and they are absolutely downtrodden, they want to have more power in the hands, because they have been thinking and they have known that for a long time they had been deprived of the sacred canopy and the dais of power. They want to be on the dais of power. So distribution of resources that give people more or less power, that is very important. So what are those resources that you want that will give you power? Yes, education. And not just education, it can be different things. It can be economic assets, it can be property, it can be your land, it can be your labor, it can be your capital. So all those things are there which will actually make you more powerful. So those resources and its distribution becomes a very large thing. Values and ideas are used by each group to advance their own interests. As we have been saying that white man's burden is there. Some people think that it is absolutely legitimate for them to rule the subjects. Why? Because it is their ideology to do this. They had been doing this because they are doing a huge obligation, or they are doing a huge mercy to the people they are subjecting, or the people they are dominating. For instance, the British. The East India Company always thought, and they've legitimately said this to the people, that actually when they are trying to rule the masses of India, they had been doing this mercy to the Asian people, because Indians were derogatory, they were ignorant, they did not know anything. It was the white men who came here and they had been civilizing us. So it was not our misfortune that we have been ruled by the East India Company. But East India Company says that it is their responsibility to educate us and to bring us out from the prison of darkness. What a paradox it was. There are two traditions, as we say, of the conflict theory, which actually leads to the elite theory. The first group believed that the social scientists have the moral obligation to engage in the critique of the society. A society may exist where there are no grounds for conflict. It refuses to separate a value from facts. In this group, we have Marxism and neo-Marxists like C. Wright Mills and Bourdieu, who are absolutely influenced by Marx. And second, we have a group of thinkers who feel that conflict is permanent and is inevitable aspect of the society, and they reject the idea that social science conclusions are value-free. Establishing the social science with the same intensity of objectivity as informs the natural science is possible, but in different ways. And in this group, we have Derrida, Coser and Collins, following Weber, who said that value-free sociology or value-free research is never possible, because every researcher, he has some laden aspects in his mind. So whenever he does a research, those laden things goes inside him. Those presumptions go inside his observation. So no observation can be value-free in that way. And he said that, as we have already discussed elsewhere, that the objectivity that we were expecting from the natural sciences, the same objectivity can be possible from the social sciences, but in a different genre. And in this field, we have Collins, Coser, and absolutely Ralph Dahrendorf, who had been following the traits of Weber. And Karl Marx made it very clear that he was largely being influenced by Hegel's philosophy, which interpreted the whole history as a process by which spirit and consequently humanity advanced towards self-knowledge, a rational and free society. Marx grew up to replace Hegel's emphasis on mind as a crucial determinant of history with his own materialist philosophy that made material factors determine events. He wrote Communist Manifesto, to which he set out a program for revolutionary government, and this way he outlined a theory of social structure and social change. Now, Karl Marx from the very beginning, as we have said, was influenced by George Hegel. But Hegel was talking about spirit, a sort of humanity, which must prevail. And he was more irrational and idealistic in his way. So his philosophy was more idealistic than being materialistic. And that way he thought that we can proceed in a just and a rational society, which will be open and more comfortable for living and more sustainable for the people on the earth. But Karl Marx, when he came forward, he replaced his idealistic philosophy with a more materialist one. Karl Marx believed people have essential nature and predefined interests, and people behave in accordance with these interests. But if they do not do, it only means that they have been deceived about what their true interests really are. He analyzed both historical and contemporary societies in terms of conflict between the different groups with different interests. Conflict happens largely because the clashing of interests between the two groups, because the two groups, the several groups that we have in our society, they have different kind of, mainly the two groups that he had been talking about, they have differing interests and diverging interests. And because of this diversification and because of this multiplicity in interests, these kind of conflicts happen. He emphasized the link between ideas and ideologies and the interest of those who develop them. And ideas of an age reflect the interests of the ruling class. Ideologies and values are actually made by the people who want to serve their own interests. And ideas of an age reflect the interest of the people who actually made those ideas. So the regimes change and the people make the changes, people make the policies, people make the ideologies and values which suits them. So what he said was, religion is the opium of the masses. Why has religion been made? Religion hasn't been made to, appease somebody or to propitiate somebody or to pacify somebody or to there's some God kind of a structure which we need to, offer. But religion has been made so that people can actually extend their high-handedness over the people they want to dominate and subject over. So religion is nothing but a mode of oppression, is a mode of domination. That is what he said. And therefore, these interests will be there. And the ideas of the ruling parties, the ideologies of the ruling parties are the ways of, gaining entry and retaining power for a long time. And they are made in such a way so that it legitimatizes that they're absolutely right and there is nothing wrong in it. But if you rectify it or if you want to go deeper into it, you will understand that those are the agencies and the mode of domination by the upper classes, the higher classes, in order to keep power in their own hands. So that's a strategy that they have actually evolved over the ages. Max Weber, 1864 to 1920. And Weber wanted to identify the origins of the essential characters of modern society. Modernization is not the road to perfection, but rather modern rationality can bring an iron cage of disenchanted world of bureaucratic officialdom. His analyses are complex and difficult to categorize and were not under Marx's impact. Weber was concerned with power and with the ways in which some people acquire domination over the others. He distinguished between different kinds of domination, both legitimate and illegitimate. But whichever way it is, people always make you submit. So, but the ways of submission, the way people want you to submit and the reasons why people make you to submit, that can be different. So that way there are two types of domination. Rather, when Weber said there are three ideal types of domination or authority. Charismatic authority. This rests on the leader's personal qualities so that the governed submit because of their belief in the extraordinary quality of the specific person. This, for example, is the magical power and the hero worship for Jesus. He's been proposed that way. He's being worshipped that way. So it's a kind of a hero worship which goes in the society. Not everybody knows what his tactics are, whether he's very rational, very logical. But his ways of domination had been fancied by the people. People have taken in to his modes of domination. For instance, the Sidhu Kanu, a tribal leader whose motives were well liked by his people. There can be ample examples. Nelson Mandela can be example. So that way, we can have charismatic authority. Traditional authorities are personal, but is handed down from the past. For example, a king or a tribal chief may not be personally very effective, but enjoys authority because of his customs, even patriarchy. Traditional authority can be another way where we are exerting domination over the people because of, traditional modes of customs. It's customary for the people to do so. It's customary to worship their tribal leader, whatever be his capacity. And rational legal authority is derived from the formal rules, and where bureaucrats are ruled because statutes overpower them to do certain things which is statutory, which is the ultimate source of authority, where it is rationalized, where the legal structures are more put into pen and paper and there is absolute documentation for it. So it is a more, kind of a tangible thing, kind of a more visible thing, which can be cognized and which can be perceived. Weber did not disagree with Marx that economic interests often underlie people's behavior. However, he felt Marx should not say that. Economic characters are the sole determinants of soul structure. Religion, education, and political factions go well, and they can be important sources of power and success. So Weber distinguished class, status, and party. And for Weber, classes meant people occupying same positions in the economic life, whether this involved property or marketable skills. So see, one thing you must remember, because Marx was talking solely about the economic agents that can bring about differences between the people, the inequality between the people. Now, economic interest does matter for Weber, but he says that it is not the sole determinant of the social structure, because there can be other things which can bring about stratification in the society. For instance, your education, your status, your prestige, your class, all these are equally important for Weber. He doesn't just talk about economy, as Karl Marx said. Weber was talking about class, status and party. Please remember this, because this is very important even in today's context. Now, class is people, a group of people occupying similar kind of life chances. What kind of chances? If you are sick today, you will be admitted to similar kind of hospitals. So people you are mingling with, maybe they are friends of yours, but they might get admitted to some Birla hospitals. But you being a very poor fellow, you have to be admitted into a cheap hospital that way. So your life chances are different. Your market chances are different. So your skill or your position depends upon, your capacity, which is decided by those skills which are marketable, which you have. For instance, your education, through which you can get an employment and have a good position for yourself, or some assets which you have, which will decide your economic place in the society. A party is an association to secure power within a corporate group for its leaders to attain ideal or material advantages for its active members, and status, sometimes called stande, where Weber calls it's based on prestige attached to their birth and family. Status is very important because it's your birth, your ascription. It is something not which you have achieved, but something which you are born with. Nouveau riche is something they have suddenly become rich. But status are those, high status people are those who have come with that thing. In Bengali, sometimes we call it bonedi borolok. So somebody who's actually rich in that sense of the term because of their family fortunes. Now we come to elite theory. Though the major elements of the conflict theory were set out by Marx and Weber, there were others as well. For instance, Pareto, Mosca and Michel. Pareto, Mosca and Michel held only a small number of people in the organization can hold authority, and their occupation of these positions automatically places them at odds with those. Elites share a common culture and they are more organized, though informally, to act together to protect their interests. Elite theory subsumes that people's self-interests and the intrinsically unequal nature of power make conflict very inevitable. So these elite theories, Pareto, Mosca, Michel, they always say that elite is a very handful of people. You might talk about democracy, you might talk about a lot of dominations and authoritarian structures, but it is actually the handful of people, the minority, who rules over the majority, and that is a structure. And elites will always retain their positions, their self-interests, and however they may appear before the masses. Actually, in themselves, they will always retain their niche which they have for themselves. They will not venture out from their nutshells which they have within themselves. They need to be within their shells, because if they come out, they will mix up with the more majoritarian population. Now, Michel talks of the iron law of oligarchy, which proposes that small groups in authority come to run political parties and they have their own ends for which they are doing it. And there is always an essential conflict between holders of political power and whom they dominate. And this happens in the economic world, and Pareto was at the same time talking about the political elites and the non-political elites as well. And the people who comes to power will be very handful of the people, and they have their own interest to furnish, and they will not do it for the people. They might say we are doing it for the en masse, but it's not so. They'll do it for their own specific and selfish interests. Now, Pareto's circulation of elite is very important, which I think you must give a reading. Pareto's thesis was the elites always rule. There is always a domination of the minority over the majority. And history is just a story of one elite replacing the other. This is what he called the circulation of elites. The elites cannot remain for a very long time. There must be a circulation of the elites. One group of people cannot exercise their dominion over the people for a very, very long time. When the current elite starts to decline, it is challenged and makes way for another. Pareto thought that this come about in two ways. Either through assimilation, the new elite merges with the elements of the old, or through revolution, the new elite wipes out the old. So there are two ways in which the elites can be replaced in the society, but whatever be it, for a very long time, a group of elites cannot continue for a prolonged regime. Foxes and the Lions, drawing on the Italian predecessor Machiavelli, Pareto identified two kinds of elite rulers. The first, whom he called the foxes, are those who dominate mainly through combination. Different traits that he had been talking about, such as deceit, cunning, manipulation, co-optation, Their rule is characterized by decentralization, plurality, skepticism, and they're uneasy with the use of force. Lions, on the other hand, are more conservative. They emphasize unity, homogeneity, established ways, and the established faith, and rule through small, centralized, and hierarchical bureaucracies. And they're far more at ease with the use of force than the devious foxes. History is a slow swing of the pendulum, from one type of elite to the other, from foxes to lions and the back again. You must have understood this. This is a wonderful circulation going on between the foxes and the lions. Now, who are the foxes? They are more crafty. People, for instance, who are into trading, share trading, into all sorts of stocks and debentures, they actually wait for their moments to come. They don't invest in very traditional institutions like banks and, cooperatives and all sorts of financial institutions. They are more, more opportunist, and they want to wait for their turn to come. Lions, on the other hand, are more conservative. Like a lion in the forest, he will not go up unless you tease him. Unless he feels hungry, he will not go running after you. But foxes are always up their wits. They're always on their wheels. This doesn't happen with the lion. So lions, you find them more into hierarchies. You find them more into bureaucratic structures where they do not suddenly jump into action. They know that their position is secured, and unless their position gets tumultuous and turbulent, they will not stand up on their feet. So they are more conservative. They are more, more serene. They are more structured, more placid, and they are more likely to be idle on their way. Veblen was another very popular American sociologist who was trying to analyze the root of power and conflict in a very broad historical context. America at that time did a sociology that was more empirical in nature, for instance, Lester Ward, and Veblen instead analyzed society in terms of conflicting interests between the social groups. And like Marx, we believe that conflict between opposing economic groups is undoubtable. Veblen was writing at a time when American sociology was more action-oriented, was more applied sociology in its nature. For instance, Lester Ward, who was talking about applied sociology and its connections, and was talking about government policies and regulations and the programs that must be evaluated. At that point of time, Veblen was talking about conflicting interests between the groups. Another person we must mention is Joseph Schumpeter, who developed Weber's interest in how a group's success is rooted in its social position. He argued classes which he used to describe more or less organized distinctive social groups, and he, following Weber, was more structured in his form, and he was definitely talking about the way that can be imposed in order to further one's status, position, privilege, and higher echelons in the society, how you can actually get up the ladders of success. Thank you.